Right, our top story today. The Prime Minister's Rwanda bill has passed its first hurdle in the House of Lords, with 206 voting against a motion to block it, against 84 voting in favour. That's a majority of 122.
It wasn't entirely without opposition, though. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, warned the plan is leading the nation down a damaging path, while the former Home Secretary, Lord Ken Clarke, said he can no longer support the bill in its current form. Well, joining us now is political correspondent Alicia Fitzgerald and the deputy political editor of The Sun, Ryan Saby. Good morning to you both. Ryan, we'll start with you. Just explain what happened yesterday and how much sort of dissent there was from different parts of the chamber.
In the House of Lords yesterday, you have what's known as the second reading, where peers vote on the principle of the deal. Now, I think everyone in the House of Lords would say there was no real prospect of this bill being voted against. But what it did do is test the temperature in the House of Lords. And there was the Lib Dem amendment put down by Lord German, which was known as a fatal motion. Now, there were some votes for that in the end, but the vote got through, and it always was going to get through. What will happen to the legislation now as it goes through the Lords is it will go to committee and report stage, and that is where you'll have the amendments put down and those big changes to that Rwanda legislation, and that's where you're going to get the argy-bargy and those fights and those late-night debates before it goes back to the Commons.
Nice conservatory, by the way, Ryan. In terms of what this is actually going to do in terms of getting people on flights to Rwanda, where are we as a result of this second reading and these votes and all the shenanigans that's going on in the Lords?
This is just part of that parliamentary process. It has to go to the Lords. The Lords is that revising chamber. Even the Labour peers are saying they're not going to stand in the way of this legislation ultimately. However, they will try to improve it. It will then go back to the Commons, and then by the end of March, there'll be a bit of ping-pong between the two chambers where there'll be some arguing over those amendments. But ultimately, this legislation is expected to be passed by the end of March. And then after that, Rishi Sunak will hope those flights will get off the ground.
And that's the question. Hope, Alicia. How much hope does the Prime Minister have that this plan can be engineered as quickly as possible? Because, you know, one of his key pledges, stop the boats, we haven't really seen that be delivered on at all, and the election coming.
Definitely. So for a long time, Rishi Sunak kept setting himself these deadlines for when flights to Rwanda would take off. But sadly, every single time he has not met them. So in recent months, he's been a bit more vague about when he wants these flights to take off, so as not to set himself a goal that he then won't meet. However, more recently, it does seem like he thinks that these flights will take off by sometime in the spring, which, as Ryan was saying, is pretty soon. That the legislation, if it all does go smoothly.
Do you think that would happen? Seriously?
It's unlikely. It's very unlikely. But that's the way that he's looking at it. So realistically, if the legislation does go through, as Ryan was saying, but maybe by the end of March, technically then you would be able to see flights go off. But there are still so many things that we haven't actually dealt with. Rishi Sunak still hasn't actually found an airline to actually take the migrants to Rwanda yet.
The treaty with Rwanda hasn't yet been ratified. I mean, I understand that Parliament is sovereign. It represents the will of the people. But when Parliament tries to bend reality to its will, that's when you encounter resistance, isn't it? And that's what we're seeing in the House of Lords.
Definitely. So obviously this bill that's passing, it's just important to remind everyone, it isn't the initial Rwanda scheme, it is the Safety of Rwanda bill. And the point of this bill is to deem Rwanda a safe country. That was after the Supreme Court ruled it unsafe and unlawful to send migrants there. So what Parliament's trying to do is bypass the Supreme Court's ruling and say, actually, we've decided that Rwanda is a safe country, so therefore we can send migrants there. Clearly, that will be met with some resistance. Lots of people saying it's not government's place to decide whether or not Rwanda is safe, but then lots of people on the flip side saying it's not a lawyer's place either. So there's definitely going to be some kind of tug of war there between the two sides.
So Rishi Sunak definitely sort of wrestling with the Rwanda bill. Ryan, the other big thing today, of course, is going to be the resumption of train strikes. And Rishi Sunak had thought, OK, we've got a bit of a neat solution to this. We're going to put in a bill which says you have to provide a minimum level of service so the disruption to the public is limited. But that bill doesn't really work in practice, does it?
No, I think commuters up and down the country thought that this great piece of legislation would mean that there'll be 40% or minimum service levels would be in place, so you could effectively get a train when the strikes are called. But it seems it's the train operating companies, those companies that run those services up and down the country, they're the ones who actually are there to implement those minimum service levels. And none of them have done that. There was talk a couple of weeks ago of one of the train lines, LNER, putting those in place. But as soon as they did, there was talk. The workers up there and the union members thought they would, even go on strike for even longer. So that seems totally up in the air. There was a bit of pushback yesterday from Downing Street. Rishi Sunak saying it's up for those train companies to put in place that legislation, those minimum service levels. But I think it will leave commuters and travellers, anyone trying to get around the country left stranded today, slightly perplexed by this situation where the government have passed legislation, but nothing's actually happening on the ground.
Your colleague in The Sun, Ryan, Leo McKinstry, says, is it time for a law against train strikes altogether? I mean, that's floating an interesting prospect, but that would put them, I guess, in the same position as the police. Are they that important a service that you could even think about legislating for something like that?
I think that I just don't think it will happen. To be honest, I think there's far too many hurdles. The right to strike, in a lot of industries, is fundamental. As you say, you've got the police and certain health workers who probably shouldn't be in that situation. There needs to be the emergency services need to be there on hand for the rest of the country. So it's certainly an option. I'm sure they've thought about it, but this is the compromise. That minimum service level is that compromise. But again, it's not actually working in practice.
Yeah, that is the major problem. Ryan, thank you so much. Alicia, thank you as well, both for steering us through some of the more thorny political stories of the day.